now relevant again, but it's actually from 2013, the Drone Survival Guide. This one is in Pashtun and English. This work is always in two languages, interpreting the idea of drone warfare as the idea of like the bird watching of the future, let's say. And it has on the other side all sorts of tips and, let's say, things you can do to hide from drones or to hack them. So these are like very difficult works. And finally, this is one that is I did a bit after. This is a research project into people living in campsites in the Netherlands. So these are basically researches into the precarity of people that cannot find a house and end up in this kind of locations because otherwise they would be homeless. So these are places where you cannot actually live legally. So this is a research into this kind of culture of migrant work and the problems that it takes with this in Dutch society, particularly the way that these workers are not protected and how they are kind of pushed to the edges of society, pushed in things like homelessness, unemployment, living on the streets and all of these things, and how these are related to the Dutch bureaucracy. So in the end, for example, this became an event where the people that were actually related to this topic were actually invited to come together and speak, because we found out that all these different people, so governments are not speaking with migrant workers, that are not speaking with the owners of campings. So in this case, design was not the outcome of this project. So it's also, in my case, used as a form of documentation, as also a form of kind of strategic intervention, let's say. So this is kind of very, very shortly something about my practice as a designer. Maybe, and also for the Frankfurt World Design Capital, which was an interesting but not uncontroversial event happening next year. I wrote an essay that you can find in this book. I think it's both in German and English if you're interested, about the responsibilities of the city in keeping spaces cheap and accessible to everyone, and to not only see democracy and cities as a form of consumption. So this is a little bit into the part of writing, because this is something I'm probably most known for, although for me it's a smaller part of my practice, but writing is like always like adjacent to the work, the design work. So this is my recent book. I'm now actually working on the third book, but it's too early to talk about this. So this is something that we can discuss hopefully in a year or something. So this is my second book, and this came from my personal quest to find more ethical ways of running a design studio or doing design work. That I understood that I had to immerse myself in the world of economics, particularly understanding how capitalism is related to design historically and today, and how we could think about other forms of design that are not only based on, let's say, profit motives and not only based on selling more products. Famously, this also comes from the meme, like there's no ethical design under capitalism. This idea that we basically have to destroy graphic design, or we cannot practice graphic design without actually being involved in this kind of production of profit and waste. So this is a little bit the goal of this book. So it took me 4 years. It was quite a challenge to understand all of this economics, as I'm not an academic, and I did design school, so I don't know too much about these things. But I think it was very interesting to learn all of these things, and to show them parallel to the design world. So one thing that surprised me is that one of the things that I would not have imagined to include in the book is this idea of the history of accounting, particularly because the oldest graphic documents that are ever found are actually these clay tablets from Mesopotamia from 5,000 years ago. And what is interesting, this was before the alphabet existed. So this is like in an early form of cuneiform, like proto-cuneiform that use counting numbers, but are not yet alphabetized. But later this became the first alphabet. So I think first of all it's interesting to point out that the alphabet, something that graphic design is rooted in, is based in economic notation. And the second thing is that these oldest documents are not poems or stories of heroes, but they are receipts, literally administrative accounting documents. This was a record of beer. So, we're talking about the beginning of the first empires. Had the first time that there was in human history cities of 10, 20,000 people. So maybe one of the reasons why the oldest documents that are ever found are actually accounting document is that when you have a society that kind of exceeds the size of like 200-300, at least in sociological terms, you don't know everybody well enough to trust them. So at the moment you start trading with strangers, you need kind of forms of accounting because you cannot just say, I know who you are. You can have this, in this case, like this big batch of grain. And I know where to find you if I need something from you. Right? So if you're basically trading with strangers, you need some kind of evidence, some kind of proof, and also that is backed by the state. So in this case, by the empires. So that we see here that the graphic technologies used here are, first of all, to stop, to prevent this from falsification, to not somebody says, I also have this record, it's mine, because almost nobody could read and write in this moment. So being able to write this was something that was very difficult to do. And the other thing is also to put trust in the economic system, and that the state was like somebody that could back up this document. So we see this also in the first European banknote from Sweden, that we see all these graphic technologies, we see different typefaces, we see, so we see stamps, we see signatures, ornamental borders, not only to prevent counterfeiting, but also to put like confidence in this document, to make the trust that is needed for economy, because economy is, in the end, only based on trust, right? If everybody stops believing in the euro or in the US dollar, then those coins do not function anymore. Those currencies cannot be used anymore. So the use of this kind of graphic technologies to put a kind of consistency and a kind of trust is just as important as the anti-falsification type of technologies. And then in the way that we communicate economics, it's I think quite interesting that we have become to understand economy as a process of mathematics. So we communicate economy through list of numbers, like you see on the left on the first newspaper of the Dutch Stock Exchange, or on the right in a contemporary financial newspaper. Right. So we are used to reducing economic activities into, like, let's say, numbers that can be compared or can be translated into, let's say, infographics like bar charts or line charts. Now, the reason why this is also interesting for graphic designers is that the abstraction of this information into mathematical, numerical information also, let's say, takes out the social context of this information. So if I work at a börse, like a stock exchange, then I read the world through these list of numbers, right? Like on this image. But behind every number is maybe a piece of rainforest. There's maybe somebody being kicked out of their house. There's maybe somebody who is being deported from a country. So all the violence that is happening here is invisible because it is translated simply into numbers, into resources, into profits, into losses, right? So it's much easier to take violent decisions or to take decisions that have violent consequences when I don't see the social realities behind them. And I think this also is important to point out that in the current way we understand economics that it literally means the organization of the household, which also includes cleaning the house, raising children, cooking food, these kinds of activities, has been, through this way of documenting and communicating financial information, being reduced to basically mathematics of the capitalist system of profits and losses, the GDP, right? So how the economy grows and how it contracts. So according to that logic, according to the logic to what we understand economy, then this is the picture of the Brazilian rainforest, the Amazon. This is a completely useless piece of the earth. Of course, we know that it's not useless. It's actually quite essential, but it's useless in economic sense because there's no jobs, there's no, let's say, terrain that can be used as capital, and there's no products. But if I cut down this whole rainforest, if I burn it down, and if I replace it with sugarcane plantations, the economy will go up, right? So it's important to understand that what is good for the economy, what makes the economy grow, is definitely not always better for what is good for the planet or what is good for people. So I think this is also important in the way that information, how it's communicated, also leads to kind of decisions and a kind of understanding of complex processes and how we decide that the economy is doing well or if it's doing not so well, right? So in this case, you will have the situation where the company of Amazon is worth $2.5 trillion US, but the actual rainforest in the Amazon is worth nothing in economic terms. So this is a little bit to kind of understand this idea of value and how do we assign value through graphic design documents, and that also means things like contracts. That means also things like money, not only paper money but also coins. So all of this kind of information, I regarded this way of how we use graphic design to assign value. And then when we talk about brands, we of course reach the part of design that is something that we today do more, because economic notation is now mostly done with computers. Even how we pay is usually done with digital cards. But what is interesting about this idea of the brand and branding, which is something that I think many of you will have to work in, and also I worked in most of my life as a designer, because this is basically where the majority of work for graphic designers at the moment is that this is also quite a recent thing. Let's say up until the 1900s, early 1900s, their brands were not so, let's say, omnipresent. Like a grocer, where you see on the right, this kind of image was the kind of precursor of the supermarket. Most of the products were in bulk. So you have things like corn or beans that were, or oil, that were completely without brand. They were just like, in bulk. And there were like this beer crate from Miller's. There were brands, but the brands played like a smaller role. It was just to say, this is from this region, or this is the name of this family that is making this, this particular product. But of course, now brands have, especially since the 1990s, become almost religions, right? So it is possible now for companies who actually don't make anything on paper, like a company like Apple, that actually buys all its phones and computers from subcontractors. So legally, it only makes intellectual property, which is designs, can become the most valuable company in the world, more valuable than oil companies or steel companies, just because of the branding, right? So this idea of brand value is something that came with the big mega brands like Apple and Nike in the 1990s and early 2000s. What is really important is to understand that the history of the word branding actually comes from not only branding cattle, but also branding slaves, especially enslaved people during the colonial slave trade. And this is a very dark and also violent history of graphic design and branding as a phenomenon. But I think this work by Hank Willis Thomas shows this really well. That during the transatlantic slave trade, for example, the Dutch East India Company had complete manuals how enslaved people should be branded with what letters on what parts of the body, and exactly as a sort of corporate system. And this logic of turning a human being into a commodity through torture, because of course an enslaved person loses all its rights to its humanity, right? Becomes a form of property, becomes a commodity. Through this act of branding is, I think, very important to keep into account when we talk about branding in other contexts. For example, when we talk about common resources or commons, things like water or air, things that we all need to survive, we also see that there's branding used to take these things out of common resources and turn them into commodities, right? So I was looking for the most expensive bottles of water, and this one is 219 euros on the right for less than 1 liter. But of course, if I put this water in a plastic cup and I will ask you to pay me 50 euros for it, you will not pay 50 euros because I need the bottle, I need like the glitters, I need the logo, I need the special glass, you know. So graphic designers and product designers as no other know how to assign value, you know. So we just talked about to assign value in the case of administration, things like land, contracts, and also resources. And this is turning something into a commodity, assigning this value, making something valuable. And there's a famous saying in the 1970s from advertisers in the US that they can even brand sand. And I think graphic designers can also do that, you know, like we put it in a small beautiful paper package and we say this is Sahara sand that is really good for your skin, and suddenly we will be able to sell this sand for 20 euros, right? But the whole process of branding, of making the packaging, coming up with the name, presenting it in such a way increases its value, and we as designers know as no other how that value is assigned. And that is for me like a central role that we designers play in how the economy kind of assigns value to products and turns use value into, let's say, commercial value. Something like sand that has value, but not like luxury value, can be turned into something that has luxury value using this kind of brand. With city branding, there's like a similar thing. I used to really believe that city brands were made for the people that live in cities, but then you see the three cities on the on the on the right side of the page, and they're all in English, but the main language in these cities is not English, right? It's German, French, and Dutch. Because city brands are actually not from the people living inside of the city, they are for investors and for wealthy tourists. So I found out through the research that something like I Love New York, but also I Amsterdam were very, very specific marketing campaigns to help cities that needed more money to sell the value of their city and attract more investors and make more money. But then not for everybody, because everybody that lives in a city, everybody that lives in Berlin or in Amsterdam is helping to create value. People make music, they come up with words, they do theater, you know, they are in markets, and all of this, a lot of these things are done for free or for very little money. You could say that some of the more colorful and more of the typical people that bring value to a city are actually people that do it for free, like squatters in Berlin or activists in Amsterdam, right? But it's still that value of the city that is then used to package the city into a commodity like real estate or like a tourist destination that can then generate value. For example, this is what happened in Amsterdam. They put this huge logo where people take photos. The whole idea is we don't want any more tourists with no money that sleep in their cars. We want to bring in more wealthy tourists, and they started to actively sell Dutch real estate abroad to get more investment. So in the 10 years that I lived in Amsterdam, I lived there for 20 years, but in 10 years was this campaign. It was a huge success in terms of financial successes for many, many businesses, but there was also a doubling in homelessness, right? So this is what happens, is the value of the city is inflated, sold through Airbnb and real estate. The prices of the houses go immensely up, and suddenly the people with the lowest incomes, who are renters, are pushed out of their houses and have to go somewhere else. So those very people that helped create the value that made the city valuable have to now leave the city because of this. So this is for me also a way where branding is used as a way to dispossess, to take, let's say, from people things that they have access to or they helped partly create. So I want to also talk a little bit about design work. So besides the work that we create as designers, like contracts, like infographics, like brands, the way we work is also important to, let's say, look into in relation to capitalist society, right? Because not so long ago, this is like a kind of romanticized image of the medieval printing workshop, but before 1900, basically, you could not study graphic design. Graphic design was practiced in this kind of idea of the workshop, where it was usually in a patriarchal family organization, where different members of the family, different ages, would be working together. Production, printing, even typesetting, type cutting, and illustration and writing were all done under the same roof. So production, design was actually the same activity, right? It was part of the same kind of master activity. You could not study graphic design. There were no books basically that explained you how to do that. Then with the Industrial Revolution, of course, the steam engine-driven printing machines became very noisy and very big. And factories were built where these machines would be put on the ground floor. Let's say the part of the factory where it was noisy, where it was busy. And the printers were divided in two parts. The biggest group stayed with the printing machines. They had to make sure that the printing machines ran smoothly, clean the machines, etc. Right? There were the factory workers, the blue-collar workers. But part of the printing workers that were maybe more skilled in drawing or let's say writing actually were kind of upgraded to designers. They went to sit in the top part of the factory, in the office part, what we call now white collar workers, right? Where they were preparing the designs for the mass production in the steam powered printing presses. So here we get the birth of the design, not only graphic design but also product design, right? So with the Industrial Revolution, there were skilled people needed to prepare things for mass production, and those people became designers, and they became like a class above, let's say, workers. So this became the moment when the designer was born that felt like somebody that escaped or kind of went out of the printer workshop and now was more considered like an artist or an office worker. So somebody like William Higgins, somebody that coined the term graphic design, was somebody who did that kind of work, right? In 1922, he wrote about this. And so these were people that were still, let's say, often trained in this kind of workshop environment, but they began to organize themselves as a new kind of profession. And the UK, of course, this was, let's say, the arts and crafts movement, right? So this type of time are we talking about? And of course, today, a design office, there's no production anymore, right? So at least in the factory, the designers were still close to the production. You still had to wait for the printing to stop in order to see if the work turned out well. Now our offices, especially fashion and product design offices, have no production at all. Also in graphic design terms, production happens elsewhere in the city, in another country, sometimes on the other side of the world if it's cheaper. And what's mostly done is the preparation of the intellectual property, the files for printing, like all of these things, especially with digital production, everything is done basically digitally. And we don't have to wait anymore for the production. So now we are in this moment when we actually don't have to wait for production anymore. That means we can work harder and harder as designers. And that also connects to this kind of class consciousness of designers that believe that they are like more worthy, smarter, better, more talented, whatever, more skilled than printers, than factory workers, and that we are more like artists. So design is not a job, it's a passion, right? This is what they say. And because graphic design is a passion, we should not complain. We should work for free. We should be fine doing unpaid work. So this kind of abuse and exploitation in the design workspace is very normal. And there's a lot more attention for this in the recent years, but still this is something that is very hard to let's say, to improve. So what's happening also is that besides the fact that we have to work, we also have to update our Behance, our Instagram. We have to remain hireable, so maybe we have to learn 3D. Maybe we have to also learn programming. Maybe we now have to also understand how AI works and work with that. So we're always like catching up, learning new software. Clients also expect us to be available in weekends, expect us to be available on our phones, right? So it's much more and more difficult to let's say disconnect from work. And also more and more designers are complaining about burnouts and depression, especially young designers. So this is something that is a big problem. I think a problem that also means that we are not taking care of ourselves in terms of how we work and how hard we work and how much do we get paid. Above all, is the reason why people say it's good to work hard is that there's somehow the idea, and this is what famous designers sometimes say, if only you work hard enough, you will be famous, right? If only every one of you in the class will work super hard, you will be a star designer, and you can make your favorite work, and you will have a lot of clients. But of course, this is not true. But not because not everybody can be this famous designer that can do whatever they want and to do this beautiful projects. And this is kind of the lie of capitalism, right? This idea if we only work hard enough, also us, we can be famous, right? We can be rich, and we can stop working and do what we want. So this is an example from the New York Times. So these are the Fortune 500 companies, so the 500 most valuable companies in the US. And there's as many men named John as there's women in these 500 CEOs, right? So that doesn't mean that white men named John are genetically better at leading this kind of companies. No, it's of course because they went to the right school, because their parents also had businesses, helped them with loans, etc. Right? So it's not a level playing field. It's not just if you work hard enough and your talent, you will get there. No, of course not. That's why we see, that the top CEOs are not like a reflection of society. They're only white guys from certain countries, right? So it's very important to understand that this is also a kind of lie, to keep us working hard and competing with each other, while in the end only a small amount of people actually get to this position where they can make a lot of money, and do what they want basically. And I think this is also very good to point out the idea of reproductive labor. Because when we talk about design work, we think about somebody working in an office as a designer. But in order for that designer to work, there's children that need to be taken to school, that need to be fed. There's houses that need to be cleaned, food that needs to be made. Also, there are sick people that need to be taken care of. So this work still is done. 75% of this work, I think, is unpaid. You cannot put it on your resume, and it's done by women, right? This used to be like almost 100%, I think. Like this, yeah, this shows from 1975. That we have a lot of this work that is not even regarded as work, that is regarded as something we have to do, but ultimately is only if we would stop, raising our children, cooking our food, cleaning our houses, society would collapse. Capitalism could not function. So capitalism can only function because of this unpaid domestic work, reproductive labor that is mostly done by women. So this discussion within design is still not being had, like how do we understand work as something, not just that, if you are a marketing expert, a marketing consultant, I think this is the highest paid design job. But if you teach art to your children, which maybe is much more important in terms of social effect, this is unpaid, and this is also unvalued. You cannot put it on your resume, right? So the difference between, like we talked about with the Amazon, the difference between what is regarded good for the planet and what is regarded good for the economy, here goes the same. What is good for people, the value that people give to society, is something else than what they get paid and what is considered work. Understand that some of the most critical professions, as you saw during the pandemic, teachers and nurses are some of the lowest paid professions as well, right? So this is also good to take into account when we discuss something like. And then when we talk about this idea of hard work, and also with this idea of AI now threatening and already taking jobs from designers, I have friends who work at big studios that stop hiring UX UI designers because basically this is something AI can do. So we might see like much less design jobs, and this is I think something we have to talk about and understand how we can improve our position as designers, doing our work, getting paid for that work fairly. So to talk a little bit about this history of how hard we work and how much we get paid. So it's important to understand that in the post-war period, so this is 1948 to 1973 on the left of this graph, we see that productivity was rising, but also compensation was rising. That means we were working faster and harder, but we also got paid more, right? So every time more and more was produced because of new machines or quicker ways of working, then we got also paid. This was thanks to unions, also the threat of the Soviet Union and like leftist politics, but also things like we still had a lot of production in Europe, right? In 1973, we see that this neoliberal politics by people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan meant breaking the power of unions, but also outsourcing a lot of production to low-wage countries, right? So suddenly, coal, let's say coal mines were closed in Germany, in the UK, and in Holland, and we now bought our coal from India or from China, right? So that means the people that were working in the coal mines were now unemployed, so they could not ask for more wages because they were not part of a union anymore, right? So we see from there on onwards, we see productivity is still rising, but we see compensations plateauing. That basically means that so my parents' generation, the baby boomers generation, they could have one income, a working class income, and buy a house and support a family of six. Now this is like impossible. I think in any country in the world, this is impossible, right? So now, for example, to buy a house in the Netherlands, you need two people that have a higher than medium income, right? So we are more and more productive. For example, graphic design compared to where I started in 2000 to now is much faster. I don't need to go to the library because I have Google. I don't need to wait 2 hours to compile a PDF because it's done in 5 minutes. So I can do a lot more, but I don't get paid more. The hourly rates are basically kind of the same, right? So what happens? So we're working more and more, and now with AI, maybe in one day we can do 3 campaigns instead of one in a week. But people will not pay us more because we're still working the same hours, right? So where's all this productivity going to if we're working harder, if we're working more, but we're not getting paid more, right? So that is because a lot of this income is going to the, let's say, the highest earning 1%. So we see that in 1965, the CEO to worker pay ratio used to be 20 to 1, and now it's 320 to 1. And that is just CEO to worker pay ratio. But if we see like the top 1% billionaires in the world, we see, for example, here that this from the US, that the minimum wage in 2012 and 2024 is actually the same, €7 25 cents, $7 25 cents. But the wealth of Elon Musk went from 2 billion to 400 and almost 50 billion. The wealth of Jeff Bezos went from 18 to 250 billion. The wealth of Mark Zuckerberg went from 44 to 224 billion, right? So we see an increased accumulation of wealth in a very small part. And when we think about the design what we practice, we need also these companies. It's very difficult to, let's say, do graphic design and never have to deal with Instagram or with Facebook or WhatsApp because that's where a lot of people are. So we have to watch out in this term, this thing where we tell each other to work harder and to work harder, to understand that harder work will not solve the situation we are in, which is that people are basically taking money from us, right? And increasing only the wealth of the 1%. So I'll talk later about ways to improve that. But it's important to understand, this is from Ecomedia from the 1980s, that work in itself is not a goal, right? We work, if you like your work, there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't live to work, right? So it's also important when you are supporting your peers or where we are talking to each other, we need to pay our rents, we need to support our families, but we also need to understand that work in itself is not a goal. And we should try to not think about work in this kind of context, but more in the benefits for society and the survival of of ourselves and our families and our communities, right? So because coming a little bit back to this kind of multi billionaires, I for this book I made this kind of graphic that is what I call the political economy of graphic design. And what you see, especially with digital production, it's almost impossible to do design without these companies. Companies like Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Adobe, Alphabet, all of these kind of companies, they control not only the platforms where we publish a lot of design, but also the tools how we make design, the colors, the typefaces, all of these things that are available to us. Um, And I think it's very important that we understand that most of these companies are also owned, are also, let's say, they are multinationals, they are corporations. Their goal is to pay shareholders, right? Shareholders own the company, and also that they're all from the US, right? So it's important to understand that we are very dependent in our profession on a handful of these companies, and we should also understand our autonomy and our spaces, to navigate within this kind of outside of the spectrum as well. And like I said, right now there's a lot of hype around AI within design. I think it's very, very problematic because I understand why people are afraid to miss the boat. They're afraid that they're going to be left out. But what is happening right now is people not hiring illustrators anymore, not hiring photographers because AI can do it, right? But ultimately, also designers and art directors are something that AI can do. And, we are also in the process of making ourselves obsolete, right? And the whole point is that we are doing design. Many of us is because we like doing design. So like this meme also says, like I'm fine if an AI cleans my house, but AIs are not cleaning our house, they're doing design for us. So this is also what this lady is saying, is that I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do my art and writing, not the other way around. So we have to really understand also that what makes us human and what makes design and art interesting and what makes life worth, living and makes it worth what we're doing means doing things that are human, means doing things that we like. Excuse me. Okay, let me see if I have my voice back. Um, because it's also important to point out that not just AI, but also metaverse and digital production is also very physical, right? We have these huge infrastructures that are already draining parts of the US of sweet water, these huge data centers that are needed to process all this data, to train all these AIs. And these things take a lot of energy, and we have to understand that we are slowly destroying the planet by using more and more of this digital production, but also physical production, right? So I think it's very important to not just say, okay, let's keep producing digitally because that's more sustainable, because ultimately we're also using up the finite resources that we have of the planet. And this is not anywhere near, let's say, getting better. And this also goes into the whole greenwashing idea that we are, let's say, we are really like pushed to buy like an electric car, like this Mercedes-Benz electric car, instead of taking a bicycle, right? So the idea is not consuming less; the idea is consuming more or green. Buying an electric car, buying like a cardboard bed instead of a plastic bed, whatever. But not stop buying new things, not using less energy, but buying different energy, so the economy can keep growing. So we have to really watch out as graphic designers that our talents are not being used in this way to kind of push green production and green capitalism at the expense of the planet. Because in the end, we are still looking at an increasing of emission in the world. For example, more and more cars are electric, but then all the cars are also heavier because they're SUVs, which completely, makes this difference between electric driving obsolete, right? So right now, it's very simple that we cannot go on, as we are going. We cannot go on with business as usual because in the end, we are looking at the danger of the planet and its species. So some of the things that I try to think about in terms of now what, because these are not easy things to hear. This is not an easy situation we find ourselves in, is to think about other ways of design that we can learn from the past or from other collectives that are more based on what we need instead of what we want, and more based on let's say, scarcity rather than abundance. And I think there's very, very, very interesting examples from design that we don't usually regard as design, but I think they can be very useful, like the snow goggles from the Inuit made from bone, that are the first designed, let's say, snow goggles ever. And of course, because they're made from bone, this material is extremely, extremely scarce. So they're made in such a way that they can be used forever, right? So this idea that you make something to last forever rather than to make something to be thrown away as quickly as possible. For example, if you buy cheap sunglasses today, right? But also this idea of being more resourceful with what we have. There's a lot of things like Jugaad in India, Gambia in Brazil, everywhere around the world. You have this kind of design hacks that basically look not in design as a way of like, okay, how do I make something really beautiful? But I have these three objects. How do I fix them with what I have in my house? So a lot of times this comes from scarcity. This comes from places of, let's say, lack of resources. So that's not something that should be romanticized. But what I think is really interesting is that's a different way of looking at design from the perspective of resourcefulness rather than abundance, like how do we use as little resources as possible, which is something that we can kind of learn from. For example, in the UK during World War II, they pushed people to fix their clothes. There were government leaflets like this one that taught people how to fix their clothes because there was such a lack of textile that was needed for the war that the state really rationed clothes. So you could only buy clothes with coupons, right? Imagine that the state would tell you now, okay, you only have one coupon, so you can only buy one piece of clothing, one t-shirt in the next 2 months, right? I mean, that would be unthinkable because that is completely against the free market. But this was in the UK in 1940s. People did that because there was there was an emergency situation. You can also argue that the climate emergency is also a situation that we would need to think about, taking better care of resources, making repair more part of design, right? For example, having repair cafes in every street in the city, learning design, repair at every design school, for example. Some of these things, make no sense now because the things are too cheap. But if we really value resources, then I think they would make much more sense. Precious Plastic is a project by a Dutch designer who made a system of open source where you can basically find second-hand machines from all different kinds of industries and turn them into plastic recycling studios. And right now there's already like 50 or 60 around the world. So also making things open source, making things shareable, right? Fixing Fashion is also from this person, which is an online website with videos on YouTube to fix your clothes. And for example, other things that I like this is in Amsterdam, for example, is squatting movement, especially with the housing crisis and the very expensive housing in many cities in Europe. They are showing that a lot of these investment companies actually own several buildings and keep them empty just because they want to have them grow in value and sell them again. So you have like these buildings in the center of the city that are completely empty, that have no function, no social function, no housing function. What the squatters do is they squat them, people can live there. They start, let's say, cafes to give free food to the neighborhood. They organize games for the neighborhood. They organize cinema screenings. So they make also these buildings, especially now, a lot of these squats are very political. They make giveaway shops. They give free food away. So they really try to be like a community, to fulfill a role in the community. Hambacher forced occupation. This is near the brown coal mines in the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, where activists are building these kind of tree houses to prevent the police from taking down the last remaining forest. I think I'm not sure what happened in the last time I'm not sure if it's still there. It might be that the last time when the police came, they took it all down. But I was very impressed. I went to visit here with the type of architecture that is based on building it as high in the trees as possible, making it impossible for the police to climb up and take them down. And this is, for example, the architecture in Notre Dame des Landes in France. This is an activist project where they're defending this village from an airport that the people don't want there. And this has already been quite successful, I think, for more than 10 years now. And this is not considered architecture, right? This is considered like something temporary. But I think understanding this is architecture and understanding how this relates to design, I think is also very interesting. It could be an interesting question. Let's see how much time we have. We don't have so long, eh? So I'm going to finalize with some examples from my book. So in the end of the book, what I did is I basically interview a few collectives because I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer how to do things differently. So what I do is I interviewed collectives from all over the world, how they work differently as design, to learn from their experiences as a form of hope. For me, that gave me a lot of energy. So this is, for example, this is a Cooperativa de Diseño from Buenos Aires. They are a feminist cooperative, and a cooperative basically means a cooperative, I think in German, basically means like business without bosses, right? So you don't have hierarchy. That means you discuss everything together and you get paid on whatever time you put into the cooperative. That allows you also to experiment with other forms of working. For example, they talk about maternity leave because that is important for them as a feminist collective. This is open source publishing from Brussels. They're very interesting because I think for 15 years already, they don't use any proprietary software. That means no Mac OS X, no Adobe, no Instagram, no Facebook. None of those businesses that I showed in this kind of all these logos of the political economy, they use everything with open source software, but that also means they put all their sketches and all their results of their design online for free, so people can take them and change them and use them as long as they give credit. So they're very critical of copyright because they believe it does not really protect individual and small designers, and I agree with them. So they try to think about different ways of ownership and different ways of sharing, because culture is always a process of sharing resources. They have a lot of, on their website, they have a lot of interesting resources, how they work. And this is, I think, the last one, Brave New Ops from Italy. So they were working in London and they wanted to establish an anti-capitalist practice or a critical practice, and realized they could not do that in London because it's simply too expensive, right? It's a very expensive city to live in. So they moved back to where their parents live in the north of Italy, in the countryside. And they also understood that they can have a function in that a lot of countryside in Europe is actually aging, right? Many young people are leaving. That means they cannot do the harvest. There's no infrastructure. There's little shops. There's no buses going anymore. So they want to help revitalize this kind of, countryside. And some of the things that they do is they share their tools. They have a resale printer that they share with the community. When they buy something, they always buy it at the local shop, so they don't buy it in Carrefour or they buy it in the Lidl or the Aldi, but they always buy it in local shops. They only support and work with local businesses, small businesses, local food, for example. So they really try to become what they call a solidarity economy. So what is interesting for me is that their idea of more ethical design is not different typefaces or different paper or different colors. Like you don't see it from the aesthetic. It's how they function socially in their community, keeping the money that they spend supporting people in the community, using resources within the community, understanding that you make a commitment to a community, you stay there for the rest of your life. So for me that is very powerful and very inspiring as a way to understand that you can have a very big social impact when you understand yourself as part of a community and not just outside a community servicing businesses all over the world, being like some kind of digital nomad, flying from location to location. That these are ways where you can really connect much deeper with communities, but also for activism, this creates much stronger social fabric and much stronger communities. And so when something goes wrong, when somebody's deported, when the government changes and you need to get into action, and you have also more of a solid infrastructure that you can rely on to help each other. And for me, that's very inspiring. So I'm going to leave it at this because I think I already went over time. So you can find more of my information right here.
Thank you so much, Ruben. I would say that it was an unconventional design talk. I'm really excited for the questions. Like, I have some questions. I'm just gonna ask everybody if they wanna also, like, we have 5 minutes, around about 5 minutes. Um, so I mean, there was like a variety of the subject that you touched. I think a lot of the basically information that you provided us with are quite important for everybody who is doing a design practice in, this day and age. So you at the start of your, I'm just going to start with my own question till we see if students are also having some questions. You started the talk with mentioning your practice at the intersection of design and writing. I want to know, how does that work for you? Like, what is the relationship that you see? Is that because of your background with journalism and activism, or do you see like a more interconnected relationship between design and text in general?
No, I think it's more personal. I mean, I'm somebody that also likes writing from time to time, so it's part of my work. But I also know designers who don't use any writing at all, and they make amazing work. So yeah, I think, look, design is always in between, as communications design, right? Design is always in between text and image because its goal is communication. So we use whatever we can, whatever we need, to yeah, to do our message. And of course, we are not journalists, we are not writers, so most of us focus more on the visual aspect. But many designers I know only work with typography, so very very much text based. So yeah, that's just something that works for me. Also because usually my projects I don't have money to pay for writers, so I just also ended up doing a lot of that myself. But I don't think it's necessarily uh, I think it's good if designers in their study learn to do some writing. So if you want to continue with it, you can. But I don't think it's necessarily something that everybody needs to do.
Thank you so much. So Sweta brought up the topic, and I also wanted to formulate the question in a different way. So your approach is kind of unconventional, I would say. How would you deal with I mean, like she formulated it as the fear of not succeeding. I would just say, how would you, how are you doing, works within your ethical realms, but also trying to survive? Tell us a little bit more about that bit that you were also mentioning in your answer to my question.
Yeah, and I mean this is also always a balance. So I try to mix a little bit my work. So right now, a kind of large part of my work is teaching, right? So this is important to point out because it's not also accessible for everyone, but never more than 1 or 2 days a week. So this is like still a small investment. It's important to keep a kind of maintain a kind of basic income. And next to that, I always have design jobs that I do, and I also have writing that I do. Mostly for my books, I also get a bit of money. So for me, it's like a mixed income situation. But when I talk about most of the work I put in is more in design, and that gets the least amount of money. It's also because I chose to work only for activist organizations, so they basically never have money. So it's a bit my own fault. But if I want to, I can go back into branding and corporate design. It's just that I prefer not to, and doing teaching, because that also helps me with my research. Um, and so yeah, that is a little bit how I see it. But that also has I always try to do a little bit of a mix, because then if some form of income falls away, then you still have something else to rely on. That's also a little bit what I try to do.
Yes, I think generally, because the word success came up, I just want to acknowledge that. Like, I mean, you influenced me this evening with your talk, the way that you formulated the society right now and the relationship between design and the situation that you're in right now. It is for me, a form of success. So when we are talking about what we actually, perceive as a success is always not material, obviously. And everyone might be basically, as you were mentioning in your talk as well, if you stop believing in the power of euro, it might, just fall over. So it is actually like a point that, after your talk, we can get away with thinking that are we actually, just questioning, are we actually adding to adding value to the society without actually getting any profit from it? Or is it like our game that you're playing, or is it like basically just what we are positioned to believe is the game generally? So that was not a question. That was just me acknowledging that your talk was basically really relevant to everything that you are, I think, at least from my point of view, I am experiencing on a daily basis. Yeah, so we have 1 minute left. I'm just gonna give this minute to you because yeah, a lot of watermelons comes up. So thank you so much. I don't think we will have time to get to the questions. Thank you
I
also.
mean, for me, it's fine to answer to take a few
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
more.
yeah,
But
sure, sure. I
if
would
you
love.
have a class deadline, then
No,
I
no,
don't want
no.
to keep you.
I just wanted to, pay respect to your time. Someone asked concerning AI, could it be a potential existential threat to designers? Um,
Um, so maybe first, I want to also respond a little bit what you were saying, that I think it's really important to also talk about this as designers, because when I was studying design, I really had this image that a successful designer, being successful in design, was also to make a lot of money, not like a lot like like having a villa, but I don't know, this image, you have this image in the magazine, the design magazine, where they go to some famous designer's house and they have like all this design furniture, no? I don't know. I had this always this idea like, this designer that has like a beautiful house in a big city with all this design furniture, and has their own studio. Like that was, at least for me in the 2000s, that was the image of being successful as a designer, right? And now I'm feeling very bad about this, and also very strange when so much was focused on this material. Of course, the main success was like making cool original work, right? But social impact was not part of that. So now that's a bit more. But even beyond that, like, I don't know, when I see like people that I know that are squatters that are building, all of these spaces for free for the public, and they make almost no money. They make like 50 euros, a month or something. That in design that is like incomprehensible. This type of dedication to public service. So I think still in design also how we present awards. People wear suits, wear dresses. We present each other ourselves as like this fantastic artist, or I don't know, actors or whatever. For me, it's like a bit uncomfortable. Also understanding that it's not only a privilege to be a designer, but also like, yeah, like what do you do it for in the end? So I think in general, this is up to every each one of themselves, but I think it's an interesting thing to discuss as well. So thank you for saying that. So I'm going to start from the top. Somebody talked about speculative design. There's a whole chapter in my book about this. And if you don't want to find that chapter, download the book, copy the book, or whatever, you can find on my website a text. If you go to, I'll put it in the chat. I have a website with resources and all my articles, but also all my articles, but also all interviews, all videos of lectures, and also all the assignments and workshop I do. You can find PDFs and Word documents from that, so you can check that out yourself. Okay, so yeah, AI. I think it's. I mean, the point is in general, it's a big challenge, mostly because this is something that is very tricky to talk about because it encompasses so much. But basically, what is the big threat right now is that hundreds of billions of US dollars have been invested in AI, particularly the people who are now supporting Donald Trump. Everybody from Meta, Amazon, Microsoft is like pushing AI. So the issue is not why do we need AI? The issue is now how can they make us use AI every day to get their return on investment? So we have to always remember when we want to use AI or we think about AI, why are we using it in the first place? What problem does it solve? How does it help us? And how does it create a better world or a better society? And nobody's arguing that using AI for medical things or better diagnosis is like a bad thing, but yeah, like for me, like I don't use it because it's not useful for me at all. It makes my writing worse. It makes my visual work worse. Like it's not interesting for me at all because it's only based on the same data set of Western knowledge, Western images that has already been dominated so much. This is why you ask AI, show you a picture of a doctor, you see a white man, right? This is the big issue. Um, and also the environmental impact, So I think that the tricky thing will be to avoid the fact that this will be part of everyday life, and I will have to start using it in teaching, or we will have to start using it in this context. This is a little bit what I'm scared of, because then we can basically not stop that. But there's such a bubble precisely because the people that are putting this AI out there are not making enough money, that the bubble might still burst and we might have an economic crisis on our hands instead of us being unemployed. But it does worry me that my friends who work at big studios are saying we are not hiring any more designers. First of all, because we don't know what the future will bring. Maybe next year, Adobe will launch like design for businesses. And if you own a business, you can just go there and you say, this is the name of my business, make 5 identities for me. And nobody's going to pay us to do an identity. They're only going to pay Adobe, right? So this is for me a little bit the issue. I think there will always be work for designers, but right now, yeah, I think if you use AI, use it always cautiously, like any other technology, and also resist this idea that everything that is new is always better. Because right now, I don't see actually a lot of things that can make it, designs better using this technology. So I think I'm going to leave it at there. Let me see. So I'm gonna maybe combine 2 last questions, and I'm going to maybe leave it there. So in terms of like eliminate the capitalist aspect of branding, I mean, look, we are talking about more than 300 years of capitalist society that was actually born in Europe, right? Like was born in the Protestant part of Europe. Now, of course, it's very difficult to imagine a different kind of society, right? This is also not what my book is about, because I'm not an economist and I'm not a sociologist, and I'm definitely not somebody who's going to, let's say, what the future is going to hold. But what I did learn from writing this book is there's always alternatives about how you can do things yourself. So I know people who start a cooperative. They do not use the profit motive, the way I always say, like, okay, the way you treat your neighbors, how you treat the printer you are working with, and the people around you is for me much more important than what typeface or aesthetics you are using in terms of capitalists. That the world is not a supermarket. If I live in Barcelona, I make an effort to learn the language, to work with local printers, and to join local collectives, food cooperatives, right? To not pretend and I mean, there's people that move here and they fly back to the Netherlands like every month because they want to live in 2 places. So this kind of behavior is like, I mean, I think we have to be careful not to use the world as a supermarket without taking any responsibility for where we live or our bodies, what resources we need for our bodies and how we do these things. This is mostly what I learned from this, and my third book will be more and more about this. So I think you should maybe check that out if you want that. So it talks more about grassroots change, because we cannot wait, we cannot vote every 4 years and hope the world will change, because there's a limited amount of things that will change. Or I'm just going to stop buying meat like I have done for already 20 years. That did not change anything for in general, right? Because there's only a limit to what kind of we cannot limit democracy to every 4 years you vote and what kind of things you buy. This is not what politics is about. So we have to talk about things like how are you organized in your community? Do you talk to your neighbors? Are you a member of social neighborhood associations? Do you help the person next to you if they're being deported, if they're kicked out of their house? Like it's more about this kind of political acts, basically. And when we are talking about negativity, look, the reason I'm still here and I'm doing these lectures because I'm an optimist person, but also because this allows me to meet people that are have done amazing things for me that I learned from them. So just as much as maybe, yeah, you learn something from this lecture, maybe you know not. I try to, talk to as many people as possible that to try to do things differently, and I learn a tremendous amount of them, and that gives me ultimately hope, right? The fact that what people do when people make their own focus, or when people do things in their own neighborhood, when people stop, the like this mind from being expanded, all of these things. They're small, but people are doing things, and this gives me energy, and we should also be aware to not be completely, let's say, paralyzed, because right now we have so much information coming our way about the genocide, about fascism, all these things. So if you are watching news all day, yes, this can be very, very overwhelming. But in the end, your body and your social relations are in the place where you live. So we should also remind ourselves that we also need to take care of the people around us, and we cannot do that when we are only worried and getting depressed about the state of the world. But yeah, that is a more difficult thing. But I try to, yeah, see it as a way, as a practice-based way, where you keep trying to do new things with people around you that gives you energy. And ultimately there's many people that, yeah, that also want to change these things. I would not have imagined people inviting me to talk about capitalism and design, and still I've been invited to talks for the last 3 years about this topic. So the fact that people actually even listen to me, for me, is enough hope to keep doing what I'm doing, and I hope it also will be for you.
Thank you so much. I mean, the talk was really inspiring. I hope everyone else also enjoyed. I mean, it was really, really amazing to have you, Ruben. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that we can get to meet more of you and your work. And I wish you guys all the peace and love in the universe. We all need it.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice evening to all, and
You too.
bye.
Tschüss.